The summer sun poured gold over the gardens of Ashworth Hall, and beneath the white silk pavilion, the finest families in the county had gathered for afternoon tea. Ladies in pale muslin gowns laughed behind painted fans. Gentlemen in dark coats spoke of horses and harvests. It was the first afternoon of a 3-day summit, and every guest had come to be seen. Clara moved between the tables with a silver tray, her head bowed, her steps quiet. At 29, she had served at the hall for nearly a year, and she had learned the great rule of a maid's life: be useful, be silent, be invisible. Her dress was gray wool, mended so many times that the patches had patches, and the cuffs had frayed to soft threads. But it was clean, and she wore it with a strange, quiet dignity that none of the guests bothered to notice. She was pouring tea for an elderly viscountess when it happened. A footman crossed her path too quickly. Clara turned to avoid him, the tray tilted, and a thin stream of tea spilled across the white tablecloth and onto the hem of a gown the color of summer roses. The gown belonged to the Duchess Beatrice. For a heartbeat, the whole pavilion seemed to hold its breath. The Duchess rose slowly. She was 34, beautiful in the cold way of polished marble, and her face had gone tight with fury. "You stupid, careless girl," she said, and her voice carried across the garden like a whip crack. "Look what you've done." "Forgive me, Your Grace," Clara whispered, sinking into a low curtsy. "I shall fetch a cloth at once." "You shall stand still and be looked at," Beatrice snapped. The guests had turned now, every eye fixed upon the trembling maid in her threadbare dress, and the Duchess saw her chance. She circled Clara slowly, her lip curling. "Look at her," she said to the gathered ladies. "Look at these cheap clothes. Have you ever seen such rags at a gentleman's table? Patches upon patches, like something dragged from a beggar's washing line." A few of the socialites tittered cruelly. Beatrice fed on the sound. "Tell me, girl, did you sew this yourself, or did you steal it from a scarecrow?" Clara said nothing. She kept her eyes on the grass, but her cheeks burned scarlet, and her hands knotted in her apron to keep them from shaking. "Answer me," the Duchess demanded. "It was my mother's, Your Grace," Clara said softly. The reply only delighted Beatrice more. "Her mother's, how very touching, a family heirloom of dish rags." She laughed and gestured for the company to share the joke. "This is the trouble with hiring from the gutter. They bring the gutter with them." It was at that moment that the Duke arrived. Arthur Ashworth, 36, had been walking the rose paths with 2 visiting lords when the commotion reached him. He was a tall man, calm and grave, with the sort of steady eyes that made servants stand straighter and guests choose their words with care. He crossed the lawn now, and the laughter thinned the moment he came near. "Beatrice," he said evenly, "what is all this?" "The girl ruined my gown," the Duchess said, lifting her chin, "and she dares wear filth like that in front of our guests. I want her gone before the tea is cleared." Arthur looked at the spreading stain on his wife's hem, then at the maid. He had meant only to smooth the matter over, send the girl to the kitchens, and let the afternoon recover its calm. But as his gaze moved to Clara, it caught on her sleeve. The cuff was worn nearly to ruin, the threads pulled loose with age, yet beneath the fraying, half hidden, ran a band of embroidery. Tiny silver-grey stitches, looped and crossed in a pattern of interlocking thorns and a single rising lark. The work was so fine, so particular, that no ordinary seamstress could have made it. He had seen that pattern before, long ago, on a banner, on a crest, on a signet ring pressed into wax. And the family it belonged to had been disgraced, ruined, and erased from polite society 10 years past. Accused of fraud, stripped of their name, scattered like ash on the wind. The House of Crestwood. Arthur's breath stilled in his chest. He looked at the maid's bowed head, at her plain face and trembling hands, and a cold thought began to rise in him. a thought too strange, too impossible to speak aloud in a garden full of gossips.
"Your Grace?"
Beatrice's voice cut through.
"Did you hear me? I said send her away."
Arthur did not answer at once. His eyes had not left that frayed silver thread.
"Leave her," he said at last, and his voice was quiet, but something in it made the whole pavilion go still. "I shall deal with this matter myself." Beatrice stared at him, certain she had misheard. Clara lifted her eyes for the first time and found the Duke watching her with an expression she could not read at all. The candles in the Duke's study had burned low by the time Clara was summoned. She stood just inside the door, her hands folded tight before her, while a footman announced her and withdrew. The room smelled of old leather and beeswax. Shelves of bound ledgers climbed to the ceiling, and a great oak desk sat near the hearth, where a low fire muttered against the cooling night. Arthur stood by the window with his back to her, watching the dark gardens. "You may sit if you wish," he said.
"I would rather stand, Your Grace," Clara answered.
He turned. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, and she felt the weight of it, though there was nothing unkind in his face. "You needn't fear me," he said. "I have not called you here to scold you for the tea."
"Then why, Your Grace?"
Arthur came to the desk and rested his hand upon it. "Your dress," he said. "You told the Duchess it was your mother's." Clara's chin lifted a fraction.
"It was. Forgive me if its poverty offended the company. It is the only thing of hers I have left."
"It does not offend me." He chose his words slowly, the way a man crosses ice he is not certain will hold. "There is embroidery on the cuff, a pattern of thorns and a bird rising. May I see it?" A flicker of alarm crossed her face, gone as quickly as it came, but he saw it. She held out her wrist, and he bent close to the worn silver thread. There it was again, not the work of any village seamstress. The stitches were laid in the old courtly manner, fine as a whisper, and the rising lark was unmistakable.
"Do you know what this is?" he asked.
"It is only stitching, sir. My mother liked pretty things."
"Where did she learn to make it?"
"I could not say. She died when I was small."
Arthur straightened. He studied her downcast eyes, the careful blankness she had pulled over her face like a curtain. She was guarding something, and guarding it well. A common maid would have wept, or babbled, or begged forgiveness. This one answered each question and gave away nothing, and that, more than the embroidery, told him he was not speaking to a common maid at all. "What was your mother's name?" he asked gently.
"Mary, Your Grace."
The answer came a beat too quickly. "And her people? Where did she come from?"
"From the north. I do not know the village."
Clara's hands tightened.
"Your Grace, if I have done something wrong, I would beg you to tell me plainly. I have no wish to play at riddles."
Arthur regarded her in silence. He could press her now. He could name the house of Crestwood aloud and watch what broke in her face. But the thought of the disgraced family stirred something old and uneasy in him, a memory of the trial, of how swiftly the verdict had come, of how few had asked whether it was just. If this girl truly carried that blood, then she had survived 10 years by trusting no one. He would not earn her trust by cornering her in a candlelit room at midnight. He needed time. He needed records and proof, and the freedom to ask his questions where no one would overhear. And he could hardly do any of that while she scrubbed floors 3 stories below. "You read and write?" he said. It was not a question. He had seen the neat hand in which the housekeeper said she kept the linen accounts.
"I do, sir. And figures? You can keep a column of sums?"
"Well enough." Arthur made his decision. "Then from tomorrow you will leave the kitchens. You will serve as my personal assistant in the management of this estate. My correspondence, my ledgers, my appointments. You will answer to me alone." Clara stared at him, and for the first time the careful curtains slipped.
"Your Grace, that is not a post for a maid."
It is the post I am offering you.
The household will talk. The Duchess—
The household is mine to order, he said. Be in this study at 8. She searched his face, plainly trying to find the trap in it. She could not. At last, she sank into a low curtsy.
As you wish, Your Grace.
And she went, leaving him alone with the dying fire and a great many questions. He did not have long to sit with them. The door opened without a knock, and Beatrice swept in, still in her evening gown, her color high. The news had reached her, as such news always did, through the whispering chain of servants before the girl had even left the corridor.
Tell me it is not true,
she said.
Tell me you have not made that wretched creature your assistant.
I have, Arthur said.
You cannot be serious.
Beatrice's voice climbed.
She ruined my gown before half the county. She stood there in her rags and shamed this house, and your answer is to raise her above every honest servant we keep, to set her at your elbow with your private papers?
My private papers are my concern.
It is an insult to me, she said, trembling now with anger. You did this to spite me. The whole summit will be laughing by breakfast. The Duke who promotes the maid that humiliated his wife.
No one humiliated you, Beatrice. You did that yourself, in front of the guests. He kept his voice level. The matter is settled. The girl begins in the morning. For a moment, Beatrice could not speak at all. Then her eyes narrowed to bright, cold slits.
Settled, she repeated softly. We shall see how settled it is.
She turned and left, and the door fell shut behind her. But the threat hung in the room long after, sharp as a drawn blade in the candlelight. The city archives stood behind a row of gray columns, a vast hall of cold stone where the records of the county slept beneath dust and lamplight. Arthur arrived early, before the clerks had finished unlocking the great doors, and gave the old archivist a coin and a quiet word. He wished to see the legal papers concerning the house of Crestwood, the trial, the seizure of property, the judgment that had ended them 10 years past. The archivist's brows rose, for no one had asked after that name in a very long while. But a duke's coin asks no questions, and soon Arthur was led down a narrow aisle between towering shelves to a long reading table lit by a single tall window. Someone was already sitting there. A young woman bent low over a great leather volume, a stub of pencil in her hand, copying figures onto a scrap of paper with quick, careful strokes. Her bonnet was plain, her cloak gray and travel-worn. She had not heard him approach over the scratch of her own pencil. It was Clara. For a moment, Arthur stood quite still. He had granted her an afternoon's leave to attend to a personal matter in the city, and here was the matter, spread across the table in dusty ledgers, stamped with the very name he had come to find. "Good afternoon," he said. Clara's head snapped up. The pencil dropped from her fingers and rolled across the wood. The color drained from her face so completely that he feared she might faint, and she rose so quickly her chair scraped back with a screech that echoed down the silent hall.
"Your Grace,"
she began. "Sit," he said quietly, "before you fall." She did not sit. She stood gripping the back of the chair, her knuckles white, her eyes darting to the doors as though she might yet bolt. He saw the papers before her, copied dates, columns of sums, the seal of the Crestwood case pressed into faded wax. There was no hiding it now, and they both knew it. Arthur drew out the chair across from her and seated himself, slow and unthreatening, as a man sits who does not wish a frightened creature to run. "You have spent your free hours reading the trial of a ruined family," he said, "the same family whose embroidery you wear upon your sleeve. I think the time for riddles is past, do not you?" For a long moment she said nothing. Her gaze moved over his face, weighing him, measuring some risk she had carried alone for 10 years. When at last she spoke, her voice was steady, but it had changed. The soft deference of the maid was gone, and beneath it was something older and finer. "My name is not Clara," she said. "Or it is now, because it had to be. I was christened Genevieve, Lady Genevieve of Crestwood." She drew a breath. "I am the only one left." Arthur kept very still. "I had begun to suspect as much. My father was Lord Crestwood. When I was 19, men came to our house with papers and soldiers and a charge of fraud, that he had cheated his creditors and emptied the family coffers into his own pockets." Her chin trembled, then firmed. "It was a lie. My father never stole a farthing in his life. But the court did not care for the truth. They took everything, the estate, the title, the name. The shame of it broke him within the year. My mother followed soon after." She looked down at her worn cuff. "I was passed among distant cousins until they tired of me, and then I went into service, as Clara, where no one would know the face of a dead lord's daughter." "And you came here," Arthur said slowly, "to Ashworth, by chance?" "By choice." She lifted her eyes to his. "They say many things of you, Your Grace, that you are cold, that you are proud. But every soul I asked said the same of one thing, that you are fair, that you would sooner lose a friend than bend a judgment you believed unjust." A faint, bitter smile touched her mouth. "I had nowhere left to turn, so I took a maid's post in the house of the fairest man in the county. And I waited, and I hoped, for some chance to put the truth before you. I never dreamed it would be a spilt cup of tea." The hall was silent, save for the soft settling of dust. Arthur leaned forward. "Do you have proof?" he asked. "These copies are nothing. The court's papers say only what the court was told. Is there anything that shows your father innocent?" "There was a ledger," Genevieve said. "My father's own book, the true accounts, kept in his own hand. He swore it would clear his name, but it vanished the night before the trial. He believed it was stolen, that whoever ruined us took it so that the lie could stand." Her voice dropped. "I have searched 10 years and never found a trace of it." Arthur sat back. He had come seeking a curiosity, a strange thread on a maid's sleeve. He had found instead a wrong that had gone unanswered for a decade, and a woman who had borne it without breaking. The fairness men spoke of in him stirred and would not be quieted. "Then we shall search together," he said. She stared at him. "Your Grace, you cannot. If it were known you helped a disgraced—" "I know what I risk." He rose and gathered her scattered papers into a neat pile. "But I will not stand by a verdict I have reason to doubt. You have my word, Lady Genevieve. We will find your father's ledger, and we will see the truth set right." For the first time in 10 years, Genevieve felt the cold weight she carried shift, just slightly, upon her shoulders. The conservatory at Ashworth Hall was a place of glass and green, where rare ferns and orange trees grew in great clay pots beneath a domed roof of glittering panes. The afternoon light fell soft and warm through the leaves, and it was here, away from the bustle of the summit guests, that Duchess Beatrice had arranged to take a private dish of tea with 2 of her dearest friends. They made a handsome trio among the foliage, Lady Margaret in dove-grey silk, the widow, Mrs. Holloway in plum, and the Duchess herself, still nursing the insult of the day before like a splinter beneath the skin. A maid set down the tray and was waved sharply away. Beatrice waited until the girl's footsteps faded before she spoke. "I am quite at the end of my patience," she said, pouring for her guests with a hand that trembled faintly. "He has made the wretch his assistant. His assistant! She sits in his study with his papers, and the whole house whispers of it." "It is most singular," murmured Lady Margaret, who delighted in other people's troubles. "Whatever can he mean by it?" "He means to humble me," Beatrice said. "He has always thought himself too good for the games of society, too honest, too just." She said the words as though they tasted of vinegar. "And now he has found a way to set a kitchen drudge above me in my own home.
I shall not bear it.
Mrs. Holloway leaned in, her dark eyes bright.
Then do not bear it, my dear. A girl like that has no friends and no name. She could vanish from this house tomorrow and not a soul would think twice. He would think twice. He took an interest in her. Heaven knows why. If I simply turn her out, he will only bring her back and think the worse of me for it.
Beatrice set down the pot.
No, it must be done so that even he cannot defend her. She must be made to disgrace herself so plainly before so many witnesses that to keep her would shame him before the entire county.
A silence fell, broken only by the drip of condensation from the glass above. It was Lady Margaret who spoke first, slow and thoughtful.
There is nothing the company despises so much as a thief among the servants.
Beatrice's head turned sharply. Go on.
A trusted girl, raised so high, so quickly, and then found with her mistress's jewels hidden among her things.
Margaret spread her hands.
Who would defend her? A thief is a thief. Even your fair-minded Duke could not argue with a brooch found beneath her own mattress.
The idea settled over Beatrice like a warm shawl. She smiled for the first time in 2 days.
The diamond brooch, she said softly. My mother's, the one I wear on the great nights.
Her fingers traced the shape of it in the air.
I shall make a great show of missing it. I shall weep over it before the guests on the final night of the summit, when the whole gala is gathered. And when it is found in her room, she is finished,
Mrs. Holloway breathed.
Cast out before all of them. No house in the province would take her after that. And no one would blame me, Beatrice added, her voice rising with pleasure. I should be the wronged mistress, robbed by the very creature my husband raised above her station. He would be made to look the fool who could not see a viper in his own study.
She laughed, a light and lovely sound that did not reach her eyes.
Oh, it is perfect. You will need someone to place it, Margaret warned. It cannot be your hand that hides it. If it were ever traced to you— My own maid, Duchess, will do it, Beatrice said at once. She is loyal to her bones, and she hates the girl near as much as I do. She will slip into the wretch's quarters tonight, before the gala, and tuck the brooch where the housekeeper is sure to find it.
She picked up her tea again, calm now, certain.
I shall arrange for the search myself. I shall be quite distraught.
Her friends laughed with her, and the three of them sat among the ferns, plotting the ruin of a woman they believed to be nothing, a foolish maid who had spilled tea and risen too high. They did not know, any of them, that the girl they meant to brand a thief was the daughter of a noble house, nor that the Duke whose foolishness they mocked already doubted a far older and graver lie. They did not know that even as they laughed, Arthur and Genevieve were making their own quiet plans to slip from the estate that very night, to a place where the truth had lain hidden for 10 long years. Beatrice only knew that she had found her revenge, and she savored it.
To the final night of the summit,
she said, raising her cup.
To the final night,
her friends echoed. And in the soft green light of the conservatory, the trap was set, though it was aimed at a creature far more dangerous than any of them imagined. Beatrice finished her tea and rose, smoothing her skirts. She felt, for the first time since the spilled tea had stained her gown, entirely in command of her own house once more. By the close of the summit, the maid would be gone, her husband would be humbled, and order would be restored. She was so very pleased with herself that she never noticed how her certainty was built upon a name she did not know, and a secret that would, in 3 days' time, bring her whole world crashing down. They went out under cover of darkness when the great house had settled into sleep and the gala preparations were done for the night. Arthur had told the stableman only that he required a plain carriage and no questions, and so the two of them rode out through the gates unmarked, Genevieve in her grey cloak, the Duke in a dark coat without crest or trimming.
A clue from the archives had set their course. Among the seized papers, Genevieve had found a list of the Crestwood properties taken at the time of the ruin, and one had never been sold.
An old townhouse on the eastern edge of the city, left empty all these years, too cramped and unfashionable for the rival who had swallowed up the rest. It had simply been shuttered and forgotten.
"My father kept his study there when we were in town," Genevieve said as the carriage rattled over the cobbles. "If he hid anything, it would be there. I cannot think why no one searched it."
"Because no one believed there was anything to find," Arthur said. "A guilty man does not leave proof of his innocence lying about. They were so certain of his crime that they never looked for the thing that would unmake it." The townhouse rose before them at last, narrow and dark, its windows boarded, ivy crawling over the door. Arthur worked the rusted lock with a key Genevieve had carried sewn into the lining of her cloak for 10 years, never daring to use it. It turned with a groan, and the door gave way to dust and shadow and the cold breath of a house long abandoned. Inside, sheets lay grey over the furniture like shrouds. Their lantern threw long shapes across the walls as they climbed the creaking stair. Genevieve moved through the dark with the sureness of memory, past the drawing room, past a child's small chamber she did not look into, to a door at the end of the upper passage, her father's study. It was much as she remembered it, though thick with dust. The desk stood where it had always stood. The shelves still held his books. She pressed her hand flat against the cold wood of the mantel and stood a moment, and Arthur did not hurry her. "Where would he hide it?" he asked at last, gently. "I do not know. I was 19. I never knew his secrets." She turned slowly, searching the room with her eyes. "But he loved a riddle. He used to say a man's truest treasure should rest where his enemies would never stoop to look." Arthur lifted the lantern.
They searched the obvious places first. The drawers, the false backs of shelves, the lining of the chair. Nothing. They tapped the walls for hollows and found only solid plaster. An hour passed, and the dust thickened in their throats, and Genevieve's hope began to thin. It was Arthur who knelt at the hearth. "You said where his enemies would never stoop to look," he murmured. "A proud man stooping to a cold grate." He set the lantern on the floor and ran his fingers along the boards before the fireplace, pressing each in turn. Most held firm, but one, close to the hearthstone, gave the faintest shift beneath his hand. "Genevieve," he said quietly. She was beside him in an instant. Together, they worked their fingers into the seam, and the short length of board lifted free with a dry crack, sending up a puff of 10 years' dust. Beneath it lay a hollow, and in the hollow, wrapped in oilcloth gone stiff with age, a thick, leather-bound book. Genevieve's hands shook so badly she could not unwrap it. Arthur took it from her, peeled back the cloth, and laid the ledger open in the lamplight. It was her father's hand. She knew it at once. The firm, looping script she had watched fill so many pages at this very desk. Page after page of accounts, dates and sums and the names of creditors, all set down in patient detail. And there, in the latter pages, a record she did not at first understand, until Arthur read it aloud in a low and careful voice. He kept 2 records, Arthur said, his own true accounts, and a second column. Moneys he believed were being drawn from the estate without his knowing. He suspected it for months. He was tracking it. Arthur's finger moved down the page and stopped. And here he names the man he believed responsible. Genevieve leaned close. The lantern trembled in her grip. A single name was written there, underscored twice, with a date and a note in her father's hand. Lord Sterling. Funds diverted through the Halloway account, falsified against my seal. Sterling, Genevieve whispered. She knew the name. Everyone knew it. Lord Sterling was among the most respected men in the county, a fixture of every great gathering, a man who had grown vastly richer in the very years her own family had been ruined. He took everything, the estate, the lands.
He absorbed them all after the trial." Her voice cracked. "He did not merely profit from our ruin. He built it. He stole the money, framed my father with the theft, and let the law do the rest, so he might swallow our house whole." "And kept his crime hidden behind a dead man's disgrace," Arthur said grimly.
He closed the ledger and held it as though it were made of glass. "This is proof, Genevieve, real proof, in your father's own hand, written before the trial. No court could ignore it." She pressed her hand to her mouth, and the tears she had held back for 10 years finally came. Not of grief now, but of something fiercer and brighter. After a decade of silence, of scrubbing floors under a false name, she held in her hands the truth that could give her father back his honor. "We have him," she breathed. "We have him," Arthur agreed. Neither of them knew that, miles away, a brooch was at that moment being slipped beneath the mattress of Genevieve's empty room. Morning broke bright over Ashworth Hall on the final day of the summit, and the great house woke to a flurry of preparation.
The grand ballroom was being dressed for the evening gala, its floors waxed to a shine, its chandeliers lowered on chains so that footmen could fit each candle by hand, great arrangements of summer roses carried in from the gardens. Servants hurried in every direction. The guests, rested from the night, drifted down to a late breakfast and spoke of the dancing to come. Genevieve had returned before dawn. She had slipped back into the house through the kitchen door, her heart still pounding from the night's discovery, the precious ledger left safely in Arthur's keeping. She washed, changed into her plain working dress, and reported to the study, as though nothing in the world had altered, though everything had. She kept her face calm and her hands steady, and only the brightness in her eyes might have betrayed her had anyone thought to look. But the household was looking elsewhere. It began with a cry from the upper floor.
Beatrice came down the great staircase in a state of high distress, one hand pressed to her bosom, her maid, Dorcas, fluttering anxiously behind her. The guests at breakfast turned in their chairs. Footmen froze with platters in their hands.
"My brooch!"
the Duchess cried.
"My mother's diamond brooch! It is gone! It is stolen!"
A murmur swept the hall.
"I laid it in my dressing case last night, with my own hands," Beatrice went on, her voice climbing toward tears.
"And this morning the case is empty. Someone has taken it. Someone in this very house."
She let her gaze sweep the gathered company, wide-eyed and trembling, the very picture of a wronged and frightened lady.
"It is worth more than this estate. It is all I have of my dear mother. I must have it back."
Arthur came from the corridor, drawn by the noise. "What has happened?"
"I am robbed," Beatrice said, turning to him. "My diamond brooch is taken from my own dressing case. I demand that the house be searched, every room, every servant's quarters, until it is found."
Her eyes flicked, just once, toward the doorway where Genevieve stood.
"Every room."
Arthur's face was unreadable. "That is a grave charge to lay upon the household."
"It is a graver thing to be robbed in one's own home," Beatrice shot back. "Will you do nothing? Will you let a thief go free under your roof?"
Before all our guests, the company was watching now, every eye upon the Duke. He could not refuse without seeming to shield a criminal. He inclined his head. "Very well. The housekeeper will conduct a search. Let it be done openly, so that no innocent person is wronged by suspicion." It was exactly what Beatrice had hoped. She had not wished to name the girl herself. That would have shown her hand too plainly. Far better that the housekeeper find the brooch by chance, before witnesses, and let the truth seem to discover itself. The search began. Mrs. Pruitt, the head housekeeper, a stern and honest woman, moved from room to room with 2 footmen and a clutch of curious guests trailing behind. The kitchens were turned out. The footmen's quarters were examined. Nothing was found. Then they came to the small chamber that had lately been given to the Duke's new assistant. Beatrice followed close, her handkerchief pressed to her lips, scarcely able to hide her satisfaction. Dorcas hung back by the wall, pale and silent. Mrs. Pruitt searched the little room with brisk, reluctant hands. The plain dress hanging on its peg, the narrow writing desk, the small trunk at the foot of the bed, and then, last of all, the bed itself. She lifted the thin mattress. There, glittering against the rough ticking, lay the diamond brooch. A gasp went through the watchers crowded at the door. "There," Beatrice said, and her voice rang with triumph she could barely contain. "There it is, in her room, beneath her own bed." She turned to the assembled guests, her eyes shining. "I told you, a thief, the creature my husband raised above her station, who could not even keep her hands from my dead mother's jewels." Genevieve had been brought up from the study at the height of the search, and she stood now in the doorway, staring at the brooch in the housekeeper's hand. For one terrible moment her composure broke, not from guilt, but from the sheer cruelty of it, the trap she had walked into without ever seeing it laid. "I have never touched that brooch," she said. "I have never been near the Duchess's rooms. I do not know how it came to be here." "Of course she would say so," Beatrice cried. "A thief always says so." She rounded on Arthur, and now her voice softened into wounded reproach. "You see, Your Grace, you see what you brought into our home. I begged you to send her away, and you would not hear me. And now she has stolen from your own wife." She let a single tear fall, perfectly timed. "I demand she be dismissed at once and given over to the magistrate. Let her be shamed before the whole county, as she has shamed this house." The guests murmured their agreement. Faces that had laughed at the spilled tea 2 days before now hardened with contempt. Genevieve stood alone in the center of it, the false evidence glittering in the housekeeper's hand, every eye upon her, certain of her guilt. Beatrice looked at her husband and saw, she believed, a man cornered, a man who could not, before all these witnesses, defend a maid caught with the jewels beneath her bed. She had won. She was certain she had won. She waited, glowing, for the Duke to cast the wretched girl out of his house forever. The great hall of Ashworth had filled. Word of the theft had spread through the house faster than any servant could carry it, and by the time the matter was brought down from the upper floor, near every guest of the summit had gathered beneath the high oak beams to see how it would end. They stood in their fine morning dress, whispering behind their hands, and at the center of the room stood Genevieve, pale, straight-backed, the false brooch now resting on a silver salver that Mrs. Pruitt held before the company like evidence at a trial. Beatrice took her place near the great hearth, her 2 friends close at her side. She had composed her face into the perfect mask of a wronged lady, sorrowful, dignified, magnanimous in her victory. "I take no pleasure in this," she told the gathered guests in a voice meant to carry. "But a house must be governed. A thief cannot be suffered to remain, whatever favor she once enjoyed." Her gaze settled on Arthur. "Your Grace, I will leave the judgment to you, as is your right, but I trust you will do what any honorable man must." Arthur stepped forward into the center of the hall. For a long moment he said nothing. He looked at his wife, at the gloating set of her mouth, at the brooch upon the salver. Then he turned to the company, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet and terribly calm. "You are right, Beatrice," he said. "A house must be governed, and a thief cannot be suffered to remain." He paused. "Let us be certain, then, that we have found the right one." A ripple went through the hall. Arthur raised his hand, and the doors at the far end opened. 2 of his private guards came forward, and between them, gripped firmly by the arm, walked a 3rd figure, small, trembling, her cap askew. It was Dorcas, the Duchess's own maid. Beatrice's composure flickered. "What is this?" "This," Arthur said,
"Is the woman who placed your brooch beneath that bed?" He nodded to the elder of the two guards. "Tell them what you saw, Hargreaves, plainly, before the company." The guard cleared his throat.
"This morning, before light, His Grace bid us watch the servants' passage from the gallery above. He had reason to think mischief was afoot. We saw this woman, Duchess, enter the assistant's chamber when it stood empty. She carried something wrapped in a cloth. We saw her go to the bed, lift the mattress, and place it there. Then she left in haste. We made no move, by His Grace's order, until the search was done, so that all might see the brooch found, and then learn how it came to be found."
The silence in the hall was complete. Beatrice's face had gone the color of ash.
"The girl lies," she said quickly. "The guard lies. My Duchess would never—"
"Your Duchess will speak for herself," Arthur said. The little maid was shaking now, caught between two truths and terrified of both. She looked at her mistress, then at the Duke, and the Duke's steady gaze was the more frightening of the two, for it asked only for honesty and offered nothing to a lie.
"I did it,"
Dorcas whispered. Then, louder, breaking,
"I did it, but I was told to. My lady bid me take the brooch from her own case and hide it in the girl's room. She said it would be no crime, only a putting of things right. She said the maid had risen too high and must be brought down."
The words tumbled out of her now, past all stopping.
"I begged her not to make me, but I am her servant. What was I to do?"
Beatrice stood frozen, her mouth open, no sound coming from it. The guests were no longer whispering. They were staring at the Duchess in open shock, and the contempt that had moments before been aimed at Genevieve now swung, slow and terrible, toward the woman by the hearth. "You set this trap," Arthur said to his wife, and his voice did not rise, which made it all the worse. "You took your own brooch, gave it to your maid, and had it hidden so that you might brand an innocent woman a thief before the whole county. You wept false tears and demanded her ruin. And you would have had me cast her out to be shamed and galed for a crime that you yourself invented."
"Arthur,"
Beatrice's voice was a thread.
"She is only a maid. You do not understand."
"I understand a great deal more than you imagine," Arthur said. And then he did the thing that no one in that hall could have foreseen. He drew from inside his coat a thick, leather-bound book, worn and dust-stained, and held it up for all to see. "This woman you have spent 2 days calling a beggar and a thief," he said, "is no maid at all. She is Lady Genevieve of the House of Crestwood, daughter of a man this country wronged 10 years past, ruined on a false charge of fraud." A great murmur of disbelief swept the hall. The name was known to every older guest there. And this is her father's own ledger, found hidden these 10 years, written in his own hand before the trial. It does not merely clear his name. Arthur's eyes lifted to the company. It names the man who truly stole that fortune and framed an innocent house to hide the theft. The hall erupted. Genevieve stood in the storm of it, her chin high, tears standing bright in her eyes. But they were not tears of shame now. She had walked into this room a thief in the eyes of every soul present. She stood in it, a vindicated lady. Beatrice sank slowly onto a chair. Her triumph turned to ruin, while all around her the county she had ruled with such cold certainty looked upon her at last and saw exactly what she was. The capital glittered with frost. Months might have been needed to arrange such a thing, but Arthur had wasted none of them. Within the week he had ridden to town, laid the ledger before 3 lords of the highest standing, and secured an invitation to the grandest gathering of the winter season. The great gala held each year in the marble halls of the assembly rooms, where all of fashionable society came to dance beneath 1,000 candles. Lord Stirling would be there. Stirling was always there. For 10 years he had moved through these rooms as one of their brightest ornaments, rich and admired, his fortune the envy of every house.
He did not know that his fortune had a name written against it in a dead man's hand. Genevieve entered on Arthur's arm. She wore no longer the grey wool of a maid, but a gown of deep midnight blue, plain in its cut, yet fine in its make, and at her wrist, where once the frayed cuff had hidden it, the silver lark and thorns of crestwood were embroidered openly for all to see. Heads turned as she passed. Word had travelled from the county, as such words do, and the room buzzed with it. The ruined house, the hidden daughter, the ledger that had surfaced after 10 years of silence. Sterling was holding court near the great fireplace, a glass in his hand, a circle of admirers about him. He was a large, florid man of 50, with a loud laugh and an easy manner, and he had grown so comfortable in his stolen prosperity that he had quite forgotten to be afraid. Arthur crossed the floor toward him, Genevieve at his side, and the crowd seemed to part before them. A hush spread out in rings, conversations dying as people turned to watch. "Lord Sterling," Arthur said.
"Your Grace." Sterling inclined his head, smiling.
"A pleasure. I had heard you were in town, and this lady?" His eyes fell upon Genevieve, and something in his smile faltered, for she had her father's face, and he had known her father well. "Forgive me, have we met?" "You knew her father," Arthur said. "Lord Crestwood." The name landed in the silent room like a stone in still water. Sterling's smile held, but the color drained beneath his florid cheeks. "A sad business, that," he said carefully. "A great house brought low by its own dishonesty. I confess I never thought to hear the name spoken again in polite company." "Nor did you wish to," Arthur said.
He drew the ledger from beneath his arm and held it where the gathered company could see. "This is Lord Crestwood's own account book, written in his own hand in the months before his ruin. He kept 2 records, Sterling, the true accounts of his estate, and a second column, tracking monies drawn from his coffers in secret, against his seal, without his knowing." Sterling's glass trembled, just slightly, in his hand. "He suspected the theft for the better part of a year," Arthur went on, his voice carrying clear to every corner of the hall. "And before he died, he set down the name of the man he believed had taken it, the man who diverted his fortune through a false account, forged his seal, and then laid the blame for the missing money upon Crestwood himself, so that when the house fell, that same man might purchase its estates and lands for a song and grow rich upon the ruin." He opened the ledger to the marked page and read the name aloud. "Lord Sterling." A great gasp went round the room. Every eye turned upon the florid man by the fire, who stood now with his ruddy color gone grey. His easy smile collapsed into something cornered and small. This is absurd," Sterling sputtered. "The ravings of a dishonest man, scribbled to excuse his own crimes. You would take the word of a convicted fraud over a peer of standing?" "I would take the word of figures," Arthur said. "These accounts have been examined by 3 lords of unimpeachable reputation, and by the bankers who held the Holloway account through which the money passed. The dates match, the sums match. The forged entries against the Crestwood seal have been compared against the genuine, and the difference of hand is plain to any eye." He closed the book. "You did not merely profit from an innocent man's fall, Sterling. You engineered it. You stole a fortune, and then you bought a fortune more from the wreckage you made." Sterling looked about the room and found no friend in it. The admirers who had circled him moments before had drawn back, their faces hard with the particular fury of people who have been made fools of. For 10 years they had honored a thief and shunned his innocent victims, and they did not forgive him for it. "You have nothing," Sterling tried, but his voice cracked. "Suspicion, old paper, you cannot—" "It is already done," Arthur said quietly. "The proof has been laid before those with the authority to act upon it. By morning, the matter will be beyond any of us." He looked at the broken man with something close to pity, and found he had none to spare. "Your titles will be stripped, the Crestwood estate, and all you took with it,
will be returned to its rightful heir, and every soul in this room will know what you are."
It happened almost gently in the end. There was no shouting, no struggle. Two grave gentlemen approached Sterling at a quiet word and led him from the hall, and he went with them with his head bowed, an old man suddenly, leaving behind him a fortune built on another family's grief. The crowd turned as one toward Genevieve.
For 10 years she had been nothing, a name to be forgotten, a daughter of disgrace, a maid in borrowed rags. She stood now in the candlelight of the grandest room in the capital, her family's honor restored before the very society that had cast it out, and the people who had once looked through her bowed their heads as she passed. She felt her father near her then, as she had not felt him in 10 years. The truth had been told at last. A week had passed, and the autumn had turned the woods around Crestwood Manor to copper and gold. The house stood as it had stood in Genevieve's childhood, a long, gracious building of pale stone, its windows bright again after 10 years of shuttered dark, its gardens already being coaxed back into order by men who tipped their caps to her as she passed. The estate had been returned in full by order of those who held such power, every acre and every farthing, and with it the name that had been stripped away. She was Lady Genevieve of Crestwood once more, and no one in the county would ever again pretend not to know it. She stood upon the front steps in the soft morning light, looking out over the lands that were hers again, and found it hard to believe it was not a dream. So many mornings she had woken on a thin pallet in a servant's attic, her hands raw from scrubbing, her name a borrowed thing. To stand here now, in a gown of her own choosing, mistress of her father's house, was a happiness almost too large to hold. She had hung her mother's grey dress, frayed cuff and all, in a place of honor in her chamber. She would never wear it again, but she would never part with it either. It had carried her family's truth, stitched into its very threads through 10 years of darkness, and it had been the thing that saved her in the end. A carriage came up the long drive a little before noon. She knew it at once, and her heart lifted before she could school it not to. Arthur stepped down, dressed plainly as was his way, and climbed the steps to meet her. He looked tired, she thought. The weeks had been long for him too, but there was a lightness in his face she had not seen before. "Lady Genevieve," he said, and bowed. "Your Grace," she smiled. "You need not bow to me, not you, of all people." "I find I rather like to," he said. "It is a fine thing to bow to a name that ought never to have been taken from it." They walked together in the gardens, as they had walked together through archives and abandoned houses and the storm of that final gala, and for a time neither spoke. The autumn air was cool and clean. Somewhere a gardener was burning leaves, and the smell of it drifted sweet across the lawns. "I have come to tell you how matters stand," Arthur said at last. "Sterling is finished. His titles are gone, his estates forfeit, and there is not a door in the county that will open to him now. He has retired to the country in disgrace, and the law is not yet done with him. He will spend what remains of his life answering for what he did to your family."
"And to so many others, I should think," Genevieve said quietly. "A man does not steal once and stop."
"No, others have come forward since. Old wrongs, long buried." Arthur looked out over the gardens. "Your father's ledger has done a great deal more than clear one name. It has unstitched 10 years of lies." Genevieve was silent a moment.
"And the Duchess?" she asked. "Your wife?"
Arthur's face grew grave. "I have ended it," he said. "What she did to you was not a single act of jealousy. It was the truth of her, laid bare. A woman who would brand an innocent person a thief, who would weep false tears and call for her ruin before 100 witnesses for the sin of having risen too high. I could not share a life with such a person, nor a name." He paused. "I have arranged a legal separation. She has been sent to a quiet house in the far north, where she may live out her days in peace, but apart. She will trouble no one again."
"I am sorry,"
Genevieve said softly. "Not for her, but that it should have come to that, for you."
"Do not be sorry."
Arthur turned to face her. "I spent a great many years believing that fairness was a cold thing, a matter of weights and measures, of judging rightly and feeling nothing. I prided myself on it." A faint smile touched his mouth. "And then a maid spilled a cup of tea, and I saw a thread on her sleeve. And everything I thought I knew was made over. I learned that justice is not cold at all. It is the warmest thing there is, when it is done for someone who has waited so long for it." Genevieve felt the sting of tears and did not trouble to hide them.
"You did not have to help me," she said. "You risked everything. Your standing, your marriage, your peace. For a maid with a strange name and an old grief."
"I helped you because it was right," Arthur said. "And I stayed because—" He hesitated, the careful, grave Duke suddenly uncertain. "Because in all my life I have never met another soul who carried so heavy a burden so quietly, and never once let it make her cruel. I should like, if you would permit it, to go on knowing you, not as a duke and a lady, only as equals, as friends to begin with, and then whatever the years may make of us." Genevieve looked at him, this fair and steady man who had bowed to a name the world had tried to bury, and she felt the last of the cold weight she had carried for 10 years lift away entirely.
"I should like that very much," she said.
They stood together on the steps of her restored home, the autumn gold all around them, and looked out toward a future neither had dared to hope for, built not on rank or fortune, but on truth and patience, and the simple, stubborn doing of what was right. The thread that began it all had been a frayed one, but it had held, and it had led them home.